You're on the clock.
Good morning. It is good to see all of you good folks. It is so wonderful to be back here. Doesn't seem like it was 10 years ago that I left. As I came in yesterday and started looking around at all the restaurants and things like that, I understand why it is hard for a person to lose weight going to diet living in this area. I have fond memories of this place. I was so glad when I was asked to come back and hold this meeting, to get to see some old friends of mine. I am so much looking forward to this week with you. I wanted to have a theme for this meeting. I was asked, would there be a theme? And I said, yes. How about this? What's wrong with? And so, well, what's wrong with what? For our class this morning, I want to talk about a very fundamental thing that if people do not understand it and do not accept it and believe it, and there are many who do not, many who will not, and because of that, you see what's wrong with this world. You'll see what's wrong with this nation which we live. We watch TV and we see so much violence. We see so much blood being shed. We see how inhuman one person can be to another person. How people can mistreat one another. What's wrong with this world? And so I suggest to you that in the first place, that has to do with this lesson this morning, it is because people do not believe there is a God. That there is a God and that God will hold man accountable for what he does while he's here in this life. I think one of the most basic questions that we could ask is this: does God exist? And for someone to say, no, he doesn't, well, that statement is either a true statement or it's a false statement. It's either true or false. Either God exists or he doesn't. And so how do we determine his existence? Oh, you ask people and you get a lot of different ideas. But how do we determine whether or not there is a God? Well, we have to look at evidence. Very basic, right? We have to consider the evidence. Of course, there are those who say, well, when I look around about me and I see the violence, I see man being so cruel to other men, I see so much suffering of little innocent people. How could there possibly be a God? Well, what would you say to someone who presents that to you? What would you say to someone if you met them, for example, in a restaurant or at Walmart or wherever, and you just came up to them and asked them, this person on the street, do you believe in God? And they say, no, I don't. What would you say? How would you respond to them? I think it's very basic. I think that we need to be able to defend that which we believe. Well, does human suffering prove that there is no God? People say, well, if there is a God, if he exists, then he cannot do anything about what's going on or or he doesn't care, one of the two. Either he doesn't care or he can't do anything about it. Well, we certainly may not understand all that we'd like to understand concerning human suffering. Some suffering comes from our own sins. Much of it comes from the sins of others. But understand this, we don't live in the Garden of Eden anymore. God did not promise us a rose garden. Well, considering God's existence, there's this group of people who say they are atheists, and if you start talking with them, you'll find that really they're not atheists, they're just agnostic. But they say that they're atheists, and they say that, God doesn't exist. The agnostic, he says, there's just not enough evidence to prove that he exists. Don't you think that it's only reasonable that if there is a God, that he would make available to us evidence that proves he exists? Our belief in God is so vital to our religion. The Hebrew writer in Hebrews 11 verse 6 says, "He that cometh to God must believe that he is." We're talking about a very basic thing here. If there is no God, there is no need for our being here. If there is no God, I suggest to you that man can just live like the animal world. Anything goes. If there is no God, then there is no such thing as right or wrong. Our Christianity doesn't mean a thing if there is no God. And so why is it that we have people who say there is no God? Why do we have people who refer to themselves, and proudly so, that they are atheists? Well, probably they may have a lot of different reasons, but I think the main reason is that they don't want to believe that there is a God of whom they will be held accountable to the way they live. They want to live any way that pleases them. And so they then come up with the idea, and it's not because there's lack of evidence, but they want to live a life of pleasure and a life that just pleases them without any kind of restraints. And so they wish there is no God. And then they start believing that their wish is true. But the Bible tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. Psalms 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. So God has given evidence to prove that he exists. And so when we then meet the average Christian, he wants to be well grounded in, and he really wants to have the encouragement that he can be secure in his belief that there is a God. He wants to know that his devotion and sometimes the sacrifices that he is required to make, he wants to know He wants the assurance that it's all worthwhile. But you know, so many of those of us in the church have kind of concluded that the arguments of the atheist cannot be answered. And so we just kind of try to avoid them because we feel like that they know something we don't. There are many reasons why, I suppose, that members of the church have not spoken out regarding their belief in God. Some are intimidated because they have not devoted the time that they need to assure them and to give them the confidence that they can meet and defeat and answer every argument that the atheist would set forth. And it's a basic fundamental thing. But too many don't have that much confidence in what they believe. And I think that people see that in us. But sometimes we'll say, well, I believe there is a God, and therefore it's not necessary for me to set forth reasons for my belief. I just believe. They say it's a matter of faith, blind faith. I just accept, I just believe. But in order for faith to exist, in order for me to have this faith must have a basis. There must be evidence that supports this faith that I have. In Hebrews 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. And our faith, the source of it, is right here. The source of it is in God's Word. Romans 10 and verse 17, now faith cometh of hearing, hearing by the Word of God. And Peter tells us in 1 Peter 3 and verse 15 that we are to be ready always to give an answer of every man that asks you the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. So our faith in God, our belief in God, our belief that He exists, well, it's very logical. Very logical. And it's very reasonable. The arguments of the atheist, the belief of the atheist, that you talk about something that's unreasonable, not logical at all. But our belief in God, it's logical, it's reasonable, and we can defend what we believe. And so again, we look about us in this world, we watch CNN and see the horrible things that go on. What's wrong with this world? People don't believe in God. And those who say they do, they don't believe in the God I believe in. They don't believe in the God of the Bible. Well, as we set forth arguments to prove His existence, we understand that the Bible does not actually present arguments to prove His existence. The Bible basically just declares it. For example, in Genesis 1 and verse 1, In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. Paul, you remember in Romans chapter 1, is talking about the corruptness of the Gentiles. And he gives a reason for that. There, beginning about verse 18, he says, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by those things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. They have no excuse to live the immoral life they're living. There is no excuse for that. God has made himself known. The heavens declare the glory of God. Well, when we talk about setting forth evidence, when we talk about proving God's existence, we're not speaking about our seeing him, our touching him, our hearing him with our ear. We're not talking about proving God in those ways, but there are ways you can prove God exists. One of these is referred to as logical deduction. Logical deduction. For example, if I tell you that I have 2 American coins in my pocket, and these 2 coins equal 35 cents, then you know what those 2 coins are, right? Logical. You deduct that logically. And then there is another set of evidence that proves God's existence. And that's a number, it's a number of evidences that you put it all together, and all of that together points to only one conclusion. And that's the kind of proof that we want to set forth in this class. So let's look now at the evidence. There is what is known as the law of cause and effect. I would say to the person who I meet on the street and ask him, do you believe in God? And he gives me this funny look and he says, no, I don't. I say, look around you. You explain what you see. You explain things. Where did all of these things that you see come from? Did they just all of a sudden appear? Nothing comes from nothing. But we have life here now. So life must have come from something or someone. Cause and effect. When you are out on a beach, for example, and you're walking on that beach, and you see footprints on that beach, you know something, don't you? You're not the only one there. You remember in Robinson Crusoe's story, that book, Robinson Crusoe, how that he, on that island, saw those footprints. And if you remember on watching the movie, how his eyes really got wide. He knew something. Those footprints were the effect. Something he logically deducted that someone caused them. The law of cause and effect. Even science says that everything must have a cause. Now this universe, we look at this world in which we live, we look into the heavens, and this universe is an effect. It must be explained. It must have had a cause. It did have a beginning. It didn't always exist. It didn't cause itself. It had to be produced by a power that's superior to it. So I would say to the one who thinks he is an atheist, I would ask him to explain to me the existence of all these things that you see. They must be explained. In Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4, the writer says, every house is built by some man. You drive down the road and you see a house and you know that someone had to build that house. Every house is built by some man, and he that built all things is God. Nothing comes from nothing. And so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that's what the Bible says about the man. God created. And the heavens declare his glory. Psalms 19, verse 1. So there is that argument, and it's a very effective argument, very basic argument. Where did all these things come from? What caused all of this that you see? And then there is another argument that's a very logical argument. And it's called the argument from design. We look about us in this world, and we see something very obvious about things. Things were designed. Design means there had to be a designer, right? By design, we're talking about an order of things, an arrangement. And so we look about us and we see that this world is not the result of just chance. Things were designed. You take, for example, the distance of the earth from the sun. Did that just happen to be a coincidence? That if it was closer, it would burn up, it was further away, it would freeze, life wouldn't be possible. Was that just a coincidence that it happened that way? This earth rotating on its axis, if it was any faster or any slower, life wouldn't be possible. Was that just a coincidence that just happened to turn out that way? Or was that the way it was designed? Design means there had to be a designer. The prophet Isaiah in chapter 45 and verse 18 tells us that the earth was created to be inhabited. There was design here so that life would be possible. This world didn't create itself. In the beginning, God created. Right? He that built all things is God. And not only does our universe exhibit design, this design shows intelligence. The heavens declare the glory of God. We look about us and we see in the design of things that there is intelligence. There was a mind behind. You take, for example, a bird. You look at the wing of a bird. I don't know about you, but dove season has opened up, and I love go dove hunting. Boy, let me tell you what, that thing was designed to fly. And I do believe they can see that shot coming and dodge it. I really believe that. How else could I miss so many? Can't be me, I know. But you look at that wing and you see that there is design there. That wing was designed for flying. Intelligent design. And again, I remind us, design means there had to be a designer. Consider also our own human body. Oh, one of the strongest arguments that I would make against an atheist, if he says, I do not believe in God, I say, look at yourself. You going to try and convince an intelligent person that you just happened, that you evolved from something that wasn't even life to begin with? Consider the parts of your body. One of the strongest arguments to me for the existence of God is my hand. This hand. This hand. If it's trained properly, which it isn't, but for many it is, this hand can play a piano. This hand can take a small piece of thread and put it through the eye of a needle. This hand that can hold a little baby. This hand that can hold to an egg. This hand can also hold on to a jackhammer. Folks, that had to be designed. You consider the muscles in your hand. Our hand was designed. You pick out just about any part of the body. The eye, for example. What a great camera that can't be. Oh, my. Our eye was designed. Our eyelash, you just touch it and it protects the eye. All of that's from design. Our skeleton was designed. Imagine what it would have been like if our knee bent the other way. Try to sit down, right? With your knee bending back the other way, that'd be a trick, wouldn't it? Design, all of that is from design. But then there is another great argument, and it's called the moral argument. One of the greatest arguments that you can make to the atheist is just from one word, and it's called tears. Why do we shed tears? Our designer placed something in us, and it's emotion. Emotion. We cry. A designer had to do that for us. Rocks and trees don't have emotion. We have been created a moral being. We have a sense of altness, a sense of right and wrong. Our Creator placed that within us. Our religious nature. Why is it that people all over this world, and I've done some traveling, not as much as a lot of people, but I've been to some very out-of-the-way places, and people on the other side of this world are religious. They're religious. Why is that? Because the Creator created him that way. Now, it is true that to know how to worship this Creator, you need instruction. But the fact is that man has a religious nature. Where did that nature, first of all, where did even the idea of God come from? If there is no God. God placed that in him. But now, as far as what he's like, does he care about me? Is he concerned at all? to answer those questions, we must go to His Word. You see, all of these arguments that I have presented confirming the evidence of God, the fact that God exists, if you notice, I didn't use the Bible to prove God's existence. I didn't set forth any argument from the Bible to prove His existence. The Bible just declares it. But in His Word, we read about His holiness, the fact that He hates evil and that He loves good. In the Bible, we read about He is a God of love. We read about His mercy. We read about His long-suffering. We read how He is all-powerful. He is everywhere I am. Folks, there's only two possible positions that one can take on this issue. Either God exists or He doesn't exist. The atheist, he has no proof. He assumes. He can't prove. For an atheist to prove there is a God would be like a man in a dark room looking for a black cat that never was there. It can't be proved. Can't be proved. The only other alternative we have is to consider God. Our time is up. Thank you very much for your attention.